Good evening. Today is February 1st, 2021, and this is the 37th episode of New Paradigms. I'm your host, Sargis Sangari. My guest today was going to be Al Johnson, a researcher and also a senior advisory board member of the NEC-SE Center for Strategic Engagement, which is a company that I established on September 11, 2014. Today was going to be part 2 of our discussion, reference the New American Proclamation. I decided to bring Al back sometime next week, given new developments since the inauguration of the 46th POTUS, referenced China's hyper-expansion since the inauguration date in Southeast Asia. An expansion which NEC-SE Center for Strategic Engagement had written about and also warned and briefed the U.S. National Security Council going back to 2015. Unfortunately, the news is not well, and the aggressive steps that China has taken now in the region over the past 13 days since President Biden's inaugurations may be irreversible for decades to come, or may now become contingent on multi-conflict in other regions. As reported by the Associated Press and also other mainstream media outlets, as you can see in the video, the Myanmar military staged a coup and detained senior political advisors, also Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, which is a sharp reversal of the significance, as AP has reported, in the uneven progress towards democracy that the Southeast Asian nation had made following 5 decades of military rule. The generals in charge of the coup are the same Chinese Communist Party puppets, unfortunately, which NEC-SE had warned the world about and written an article which we published on January 29, 2018, nearly 3 years to the date of the newest military coup that took place. Our article was titled Ethnical Cleansing in Burma and Arakan region. The Chinese move in and also at the same time forced ethnic minorities out. Again, this was 3 years to the date, which we gave this warning to the world before the coup took place. During a 17 to 23 January 2018 visit to northern and also at that time southern Thailand, a portion of my trip was in conducting the NEC-SE's regional strategic assessment for Southeast Asia, which led to the white paper that was given to the National Security Council at that time in January of 2018, where I looked into the causes of the crisis in Burma in 2017 that had led to almost 65,000 people at that time being forced from their homes and at least 6,000 killed. I found out that the crisis was not attributable, as it is now being said that by the same mainstream media, as they have done again in covering the coup, to the discriminatory policies, as they refer, by the government of the now arrested Nobel laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, but rather to the Burmese Army operations to ethnically cleanse Arakan of their Rohingyas and other non-Burmese groups. And as we know, just before Secretary Pompeo left office, we did state from the State Department that the Chinese were conducting a genocide against the various different Muslim populations and minorities within the Chinese span of control. In the article, I looked also into why General Hlaing, which you have seen in the video, who is now the lead of this so-called coup, which is being referenced by majority of the people in the AP as being the fact that the Nobel laureate was being too close to China. So the same general that we reference as being a Chinese puppet going back to 2018 is the one now saying that he conducted the coup because he did not want to see Burma get closer to the Chinese influence, which makes no sense given the fact that in 2015 we had already indicated that he was under Chinese control. So look, the Burmese army at that time had taken such an interest in the Arakan region, nobody knew why, which was basically a remote and is still an impoverished region in the far west of the country. Reality was that the answer lay in China and the CCP's ambitions to control the Straits of Malacca in order to be able to force the U.S. to be able to make a majority contribution to its naval presence within the region if it was going to affect the Pacific at all. Because if you control that strait, you are now forcing and effectively controlling 75% of most of the commerce that is coming through the Pacific by naval fleets. Arakan is a home to the largest Chinese expansionist project in the region at that time. The Chinese government, and still the as known as CITIC, or the Chinese International Trust Investment Corporation, at that time was streamlining $14 billion project into the region, where it still is building a deep water port and an oil transport and processing facility and other projects designated to take delivery of and from the Middle East, and pipelining it directly to China, which allows China to be independent when it comes to energy requirements, at the same time as the United States is looking at getting rid of its independence that we had achieved when it came to energy. But China has the ability now to be able to, again, be able to take as much oil as it wants from the Middle East in order to be able to allow itself to be as independent as possible as it expands in the Southwest region. On October 16, 2015, I wrote the article, New Power Relations and the Middle East Crisis. In the article, Near East looked at how in September of 2012, at that time, the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi gave a speech at the Brookings Institute in which he presented China's vision of the future in an address that he titled A New Power Relations. According to Mr. Wang Yi at that time, the interests of China and also the United States were clearly divergent and would thus enable the two nations to avoid the kind of friction, as he referred to, that could spark conflict between expanding powers and dominant global powers in the region. And when he conceptualized it in the concept of new power relations, he stated that it was necessary and inevitable that a peaceful one step would have to be taken for China and the U.S. to work together through administration that would allow us not to get to a point where we would be devastating vast regions and killing millions in previous centuries, referring to possible wars within the regions. Of course, for those regions that the U.S. at that time effectively conceded to China, life under the Chinese hegemony was not best at all. It was lived on terms dictated by the rulers in Beijing. And given the fact that the Chinese Communist Party's nature of the regime is to suppress, it is altogether likely that those terms would be very unpleasant for those who would find themselves under the control of the Chinese communist leadership. So how does that tie into Burma? It is very simple. As the mainstream media is looking at now, blaming everything on the Nobel laureate for the fact that China was somehow going to become more influential in Burma, which it was through its military to begin with, that the recent coup that took place was going to be more favorable to the West, which is not true, because the same generals that we talked about in our article and in our white paper that was submitted to the National Security Council, General Hlaing, is the same individual who conducted the coup who was on the payroll of the Chinese, which is something we have to think about. Keep in mind that the only difference between President Obama and President Trump's foreign policy for the Middle East region was very simple. President Obama wanted to leave the Middle East as he looked at South America as being a focal point for him. President Trump wanted to leave the Middle East just like President Obama, but his main focus was going to be Southeast Asia and how to counter China. However, under the Obama administration, the want and desire was to work with China on a global level and bought into the power relations concept, which Mr. Wang Yi had proposed to the Obama administration, which is the reason why we wrote the article that we did, stating that this was going to be devastating to the majority of the region. So instead of President Obama's administration at that time effectively countering what the Chinese were proposing for the two nations, it literally looked at how it can maybe possibly even try to actualize the new power relations, which is why at that time Susan Rice gave her own speech at Georgetown University, where she articulated instead of a countervision to what was interest to America within the region, but actually looked at how we can actualize the new power relations with China. So in a few years under the Obama administration, the United States had surrendered initiative and also leadership on foreign policy to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization accesses, and also to China ahead of what U.S. should have had being its own terms to conceptualize a vision for the future of the region. Where does that lead us today? Where it leads us is very simply to the fact that we also wrote an article from the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement going back to 2015, where we asked a simple question. Whether or not once Biden entered the race, would he be able to complete President Obama's foreign policy into the region? Now, we wrote this article in 2015. The fact that we wrote it in 2015 was because we understood how foreign policy works. We understood what the wants and desires and the link analysis was between the Obama administration and the current Biden administration today. And the reality of it is that the two administrations have worked together. The current administration has brought on a lot of the Obama holdovers to be part of its foreign policy. And the fact that we are where we are today with the General Hlaing, who's you can see in the video, who has now taken over Burma, who works for the Chinese, is very significant for us. And we have to start asking these questions that the mainstream media does not ask. Why is it that we are now where we are today? Take a look at the COVID bill that recently Congress was fighting over to try to pass. And if possible, we'll put it up so you could take a look at it. A lot of foreign dollars, a lot of our money, which is part of the COVID relief package, today is designated to go to foreign powers, which was a concern even under the previous POTUS, President Trump, which hopefully is going to be addressed under the current POTUS. Where is the money going to? It's going to Pakistan. Majority of the leadership in Pakistan is beholden to the Chinese interest, especially given the fact that China is expanding in Pakistan, especially in the regions where it's going to allow itself as a lead of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to be able to affect Southeast Asia and also to be able to build its presence in the Middle East region. The same as the money is going also in that COVID bill to Burma. Under the current military leadership, that money will be given to the General Hlaing, who conducted a coup, who is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. So the question Near East would ask now, understandably, that we had asked in 2015 whether or not President Biden, or today's President Biden, if he had entered the race, would he be able to complete Obama's foreign policy, which the Obama administration had agreed with when it comes to Wang Yi's vision and China's vision for the region. So on October 13, 2015, as you see, we had asked that question. We asked that question again. Is this policy going to be executed, which is going to be the same policy that allows the Shanghai Cooperation Organization unfettered access to the Middle East and Southeast Asia through its supporting main axis of evil, which is Russia, China, and Iran, expansion in both regions? And is it going to allow us as Americans to actually use our American hard-earned dollars to subsidize Chinese operations in both Pakistan and Burma and other regions of the Southeast Asia, by doing nothing more than putting it under what we are referring to as a COVID relief package? The money that is being designated to these nations, the question needs to be asked, who was the person who pushed for money for Pakistan? who was the person who pushed the money for Burma. And as you can see, I was on the ground with my buddy Michael Yon, who's currently in the United States, and it's looking at the influence that might be being pushed through South America into the United States. That is, again, tied a lot of it to the Chinese interests within the United States and how it can affect our energy policies in order to be able to set itself on a stronger footing as it becomes energy independent, and now it pushes us away from the energy independence that we had achieved under the previous administration. Take a look at what we are doing today as we look at going to push the Green New Deal that the current administration wants to push for. A lot of the mineral rights that we're going to have to use in order to develop our future technologies are controlled by the Chinese. They not only control them in South America, but they also control them in Southeast Asia. So who ends up winning at the end? Through the Corona relief package of foreign dollars going to Burma and to Pakistan, China, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Who gets support when we stop our new oil pipelines coming in to keep us energy dependent through Canada? China, because it still develops its coal plants and it still uses oil through the Middle East, through the Straits of Malacca, in order to push that oil, to burn more oil fuel, to create more carbon footprint signature as we burn in the United States, and say that the United States has to be beholden to Chinese mining companies in order to develop its future technology, as China itself actually builds new coal power plant because we refer to them as a developing country. Look, the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement has always looked in advance at things. Whether it was looking at Biden coming in and expanding President Obama's foreign policy, as it was tied to Wang Yi's briefing at the Brookings Institute, which we tried to conceptualize under Susan Rice going back to 2015, or whether or not when we looked at Burma and we wrote a white paper on it, because we were on the ground looking at the realities of what may happen in the future, almost 3 years ago to the date of the coup that took place, where the Chinese now have again once more shown their influence in Burma. Unfortunately, the next ally that might be affected would be Thailand in this case, because the Chinese will push as many people as possible directly into Thailand, and all the refugees that they push on Thailand is going to really put pressure on Thailand to be able to handle the enormous number of refugees as it will receive. Thailand having its own issues internally with the military being split, the support that China is pouring into the region is very important, significant. There's a picture that I took while I was in Thailand. It shows a picture of President Xi, a book that was written on it. That book was actually being sold in Thailand itself. So China slowly does influence all the nations that are strategic for us when it comes to our final needs. And this is actually a picture of a book that I took in at that time in 2018, looking at how China is expanding. A lot of the cartoons that are being shown in Thailand and even other countries in Southeast Asia are specifically Chinese language cartoons. And as we know, Chinese schools have a lot of influence here on U.S. policy. Chinese conglomerates control a lot of our press, unfortunately, through financial ties. And as we see today, even the COVID relief package that we are looking at pushing might be looking at specifically trying to get money to subsidize Chinese operations both in Burma and Pakistan. So I would ask our readers to take a look at what Near East has written about. Take a look at the fact that we wrote it 3 years to almost 7 years now in advance of where we were going to be. We are a think tank and we look in advance on these particular issues. The linking analysis is not that difficult. When you look at the Obama administration buying into the Chinese understanding of the new power relations as far as where he wants it to be, and the current president Biden coming in and actually hiring a lot of that staff, this is the issue that we run into. The foreign policies of previous administrations being executed under the current administration. So again, I ask, can Joe Biden complete the final phase of President Obama's foreign policy for the Middle East, which means that Southeast Asia, will be under much more of a significant control of the Chinese government, and China will have to become much better when it becomes to energy independence. Unfortunately, they will be using coal power plants to burn energy in order to produce it, to be able to sustain themselves and stabilize themselves internally as we start working with Chinese companies beholden to them when it comes to mineral rights. We hope that the white paper and the information that we gave to the National Security Council is going to be still looked at. And we ask our listeners today, go to the COVID relief bill, ask who were the people who supported and pushed for money for Burma, who pushed for money for Pakistan, and see if they have any ties to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and see if that money is going to somehow be laundered to subsidize Chinese operations within the region against American interests. With that said, I hope you follow us and read about us on the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. And again, please go to our site. You can be our mailers, and we will continue to look into this issue with both Michael Yon, who's going to be probably on the show sometime next week, and also Al Johnson, who are advisors on the Board of Advisors for the Near East Center for Strategic Engagement. God bless you all and keep you, and this is New Paradigms.